It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You could get a hold of me through Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our guest today is Marlin Marynick. Okay, and I found him. He made this little comment. We were talking. I popped up a picture there of who's that guy? Russell Brand and P. Diddy. And right away he had some. He's that behind-the-scenes comment.
Big photo.
Yeah. We'll get to that, man. But he's written a book called Charles Manson Now, and he's also written a previous book called The Undisclosed Secrets of the AIDS Epidemic. But he seems to be into all the stuff we're into here at the Opperman Report. Marlin Marynick. Are you there?
I'm here. It's good to finally do this and meet you.
Oh, yeah, man. Same here.
Yeah.
But tell the audience, who is Marlin Marynick?
It's a big question. I'm in Saskatchewan, Canada, so right in the middle of the prairies by North Dakota, Montana. I'm a psychiatric nurse. That's kind of what I do. I've always had creative outlets. I've played music and did writing, all that film, that kind of stuff. And I fell into a relationship with Charles Manson, which, of course, was way bigger than I even could imagined at the time, and it's still going on, even though he's long passed. So that, my career as a psychiatric nurse, kind of gave me some insights into that world and the people around him and true crime in general. So it's hard to describe who I am.
No, I know. That's the toughest question. They get easier, and there's no math.
Yeah.
There's no math in this interview whatsoever. Now, what does the psychiatric nurse do? Okay, because
so what I do, I've had the same job for. I don't. How do I say it? I've never really applied for a job. Someone says, "Do you want to come kind of work here?" Then I kind of follow my gut, and I've been working frontline crisis response team for 25 years. There's been a lot of changes. Right now, we got a major opioid, fentanyl, meth problem in my city. Homelessness, like it is in America. It's kind of the same over Canada too. So a lot of frontline, a lot of actual mental illness, a lot of social problems, a lot of addiction issues. Then I deal a lot with adolescents and geriatrics and true mental illness like schizophrenia. Bipolar disorder, that kind of trauma. Pretty much everything is trauma-based.
Yeah, right. Well, in Canada, do you actually take these people in and treat them? Because here we just have these open-air tent cities of hundreds and hundreds of people just zombieing out in the streets right before our eyes. Yeah.
It's a new phenomena here, but it's turning that way as well. The populations have grown so much and we just don't have the resources, and nobody is acting fast enough to really get on top of it. Yeah, it's bad everywhere.
Yeah, just terrifying, man. And now we got this whole situation with the tariffs and the deportations. It can only get worse.
Yeah.
So before you actually, before you got into the whole Manson, what was that?
Okay, and on that happy note, yeah, but
I know. Usually I rely on the guest to cheer me up, man. To get me through the interview.
Yeah.
So before you actually went and met Manson, what was your background and all that kind of interests and fascinations in those kind of topics?
I knew about his music more than anything because I'm a big fan of obscure, indie, underground kind of stuff. So I was kind of grounded in that. And when I was a kid, I read Helter Skelter. I was like maybe 12, so I didn't really grasp what was happening. I really didn't know, but I just knew. That whole thing about demonic possession is kind of the same as being mind control and the whole cult thing. And honestly, the guy terrified the hell out of me when I was a kid. Yeah. He was kind of my boogeyman and like that. Yeah. So he kind of showed up over the years. You'd see him on parole hearings and, Axl Rose got in trouble wearing a Charlie shirt. There was always, he's kind of always there in pop culture, but I never really went into it at all, not to the level I would, that's for sure.
So then what happened first? Did you meet him first or you wrote the book first?
So what happened, I was doing some film stuff with a couple people and just trying to, get out of here and find a way to travel and a way to do something. Where I live in Saskatchewan, it's very wide open. It's probably the size of California, and there's like 1 million people here. There's a lot of roads. We're used to driving 12 hours to Minneapolis or 13 hours to Denver. You drive a lot, and so planning road trips or doing things and meeting people, that's kind of normal. That's kind of how we grow up here. So I'm a collector too. Might be turning into hoarding a little bit, but I met a guy on eBay. His name was Donald Taylor, and he was selling some of James Dean's hair, some correspondence he had from Charles Manson, and a shirt that belonged to Elvis. And so I asked him, how did you get these things? And he sent me his phone number saying, well, it'd be easier if you just called me. I could tell you. And I ended up talking to the guy for 2 or 3 hours. He was hilarious. He was like a total personality. And turned out he had known Charlie before the murders happened, and they had kept in touch all of this time, and they still wrote, letters back and forth. So when I was planning a road trip, I decided, I would go meet Don. And when we did that, we filmed him. We started to do some stuff. We got him on Howard Stern, and it was we're just kind of doing that. And then all of a sudden, he told Charlie about that, and Charlie had it in his head that he wanted to do a final interview. He's getting older. He had a few people he wanted to take care of. He thought there would be a lot of money in that. And because I was in Canada, that's the only reason. He thought that somehow the prison system couldn't say no to the world press, and I could get in with a camera and we could do this interview. So that was kind of the setup. So Dawn had told me, yeah, Charlie wants to talk to you. He's going to call you. And yeah, I never thought in a million years that would happen.
And what was the first phone call like?
So when he called, it's unmistakable. You know who you're talking to, right? And it was kind of more of an interview than a conversation. He wanted to know what my dad did for a living, what I did, what my interests were, what kind of bugs I liked. And then at one point he told me about this interview he wanted to do. And he said he wanted to dress up like a general and command all the armies in the world to stop fighting each other and start fighting pollution. And he asked if it'd be okay if I dressed up like a soldier. And I'm like, yeah, man, I can get behind that. And so that was kind of it. And then from there, we started planning how we're going to do this interview, right?
Well, wasn't he in a position that he can call up anybody? He could call up Howard Stern and say, I want to do an interview?
The thing is, I think it was the Geraldo interview he did. He kind of made a mockery of things. And so there's a law in California where you cannot interview specific inmates. So if you're doing like a Netflix special on somebody, you can go to that jail and they might give you 4 inmates that kind of know the guy or kind of know how the routine is out there and try to put something together, but you won't talk to, a guy like Charles Manson or something like that. So I know people, whatever, we took it as far as we can, and the BBC took a really good shot at it, and I thought it was going to happen, but in the end, they just refused to allow him to have that final interview.
So you couldn't pull off like a video interview, and were you trying to finance this yourself, or you were trying to come up with funding?
Well, that's part of the problem. I had a partner, and he wanted to do funding, and because of the dark nature of the topic, we got turned down all of that kind of grant money and stuff. But I would have rather just went for it and did it on my own. You got access to something like this.
Yeah.
So eventually, when we kind of like, I don't want to say I manipulated him, or I kind of I respected how do I like we kind of connected. He kind of tested me a little bit. Eventually, it came to a point where he was willing to meet with me. He hadn't seen anybody in like 3 years. So the first time I went out to the prison, they're like, well, no, he's not. This is fake documents, like he didn't sign this here. There's no way he's seeing anybody. And then the warden sent me a letter saying, just show this next time you come out. And eventually we met. And so I will share with you what all this is about. So ultimately we're talking about money here, right? And Charlie wanted to take care of a few people. He's aging. His health kind of deteriorating. So when I met with him, I'm like, man, I could do a book. We could And he's like, there's 400 books on me. Like, what do you got to say, kind of thing? And I'm like, well, And so he kind of outlined how I would do a book. And part of what he wanted to do then, he's like, okay, I'll figure out a way to get a recording to you. It'll be about 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours. And that's what we're going to do, right? That will be my commitment to your book. I would give him half of the money, and I would keep half, and we would, kind of go from there. So with that proposal, I went and got a book agent, and then we approached like the top tier media people, and they were all interested. And the one's problem was that I'm not really a writer, I'm not known, and they thought they're taking a big chance. They wanted to bring a ghostwriter. I wasn't into that idea at all. I could, I figured I could put it together. It's my story. I didn't know how. I was kind of scared actually what a ghostwriter would do, and so eventually I decided to keep it in Canada, and we signed with the publisher, and everything kind of went south. The one thing I want to mention about Charlie, he's cursed, and I would tell him, I was like, man, you're cursed. He goes, no, I'm not. I'm prophesized, but the guy has the worst luck ever out of, and I watched all these people with all of these projects just fall to crap. They don't, I know people have like basements full of books and records and stuff that they've been involved with, and people have lost careers, and people went insane researching this stuff,
Yeah, it does seem to drive some people crazy, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of questions. You mentioned that he wanted to take care of a few people. Who were these people he was interested in taking care of on the outside?
Yeah, so there's an assumption that he has a family, but it's never really like that. He just said, his take on that is when he got out of jail, the world had changed so much. He kind of fell out in the middle of the hippie thing, and he said those kids took care of him. He had no idea how to function, and I asked him if that was true, that he didn't really want to get out. I said, absolutely, man. He was terrified. He didn't want nothing to do with this world, But the weird thing about him, I'll give you a quick example. Like when I was going to go see him, there was another good guy he was kind of talking to. And Charlie had called me right after he talked to this guy, and he was so offended because this guy called him and said, Charlie, I'm going to be in California in a month. I'm going to come and see you, right? And he's like, who the hell does this guy think he is, So you got to say, Charles, I'm going to be in California in a couple months. It'd be really cool if I could see you. But if you're too busy, I get that. You kind of got to keep it like that. You got to be respectful, I guess, like really, like just treat him like anybody else. And that's what he wanted. And he was kind of loyal to a fault with relationships. I know it doesn't sound like that, but there are people that he's kept in touch with since, before all of this happened. He has friends that he's kept for like 40 years up there.
And he is our elder, he's our senior in age. You got to be respectful. You don't just start bossing people around, especially in his kind of environment where you have to maintain your position. Otherwise, you're in a bad position. Sure. Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that that you knew someone who knew him before the murders, right? Now, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that was Donald Taylor. They had kept in touch over the years. They had met in San Francisco when he was there. And they both have the same story and the same remembrance of that. So that was, I think, I can't really name other key people. Like there are fringe people that were Manson family people that he kept in touch with. But there are certain people that, in the 90s, it was the Satanists that kind of kept him going, that were visiting. He kept his doors open. Like, back then, anybody would write him and stuff, and he would see anybody because he was just looking at free commentary, But eventually, he had to kind of, and there's outside people that kind of watch what he's done, and things are cleared with, and you talk to, and it's kind of bizarre. But I mean, Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of interested in, like, before the murders, because I know he had an association with, like, an escort service. I think it was called Star Entertainment or something like that. And traveling around with the Beach Boys. And not traveling, but, associating with the Beach Boys. What was his life like? Because most people imagine him at Spawn Ranch and up there in the desert with these school buses and stuff. But what was his life like before the murders?
It's a constant hustle for him. I mean, they were petty criminals for the most part, even stealing food and stuff to kind of get by. He never really made it on he's connected in those worlds, like knowing mob people and high profile criminals and gangsters and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at his criminal record that led up to everything, it's pretty dismal. I mean, it's not that great of a criminal mastermind,
Yeah,
so he did all
stolen cars, yeah.
Yeah, but he could read people, he know how to build you up and break you down, and he had like a pimp mentality, you know. And we would philosophize about these things. That he'd call one day, and his first question would be like, "Have you ever forced your will on anybody?" And I'm like, "Well, no. Why would you?" And he's like, and like that kind of stuff, right? When he read the book, he's dyslexic, right? He can't read very well. He was in the hole, so he had the inmate beside him read everything. And the big problem, I didn't come from a normal. Well, we all have different childhoods, right? I should have maybe. So basically, where I come from, my mother completed suicide. My dad was a functioning alcoholic. I ended up in a town where I couldn't relate to anybody. My older brother basically raised me. So it's I came from a kind of a background, and those kind of people are attracted to people. Like, he's kind of like an anti-hero in a way, right?
Right.
And so when he read my book, he's like, honesty is important to him. And so he's like, "You're not being honest in your book." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he goes, "Were you ever molested?" And I'm like, "Well, no. I was neglected. I wouldn't even say I was abused, Charles, but, I wasn't. I didn't go through any of that growing up." He goes, "Really? You were never molested?" I'm like, "No, I honestly was not." He goes, "You're telling me the truth." I go, "Yeah, I would tell you, man, if I was." And he's like, "That's far out, man. You're the only friend I have that hasn't been." And so it's like, I don't know if it's a rite of passage for him or, But
well, Marlon, let me ask you this, because with this background, did you ever think that things would get so bad that you'd wind up as a guest on the Opperman Report? The lowest point of your life? It can only go up from here, my friend. A couple of quick questions.
I do. I love your work, man.
Oh, thank you, man.
And to go into the stuff you do, it's like, even there's one moment where I was actually terrified doing this, because now I'm doing a book, right?
Yeah.
I'm doing this book, and I have to figure out, how am I going to tell this story, and who am I going to talk to and all that kind of stuff. And so for some reason, I thought the first approach would be, I need to go to Spawn Ranch, and I need to go to all these sites, and I need to, do all of that. And so I was going to go out to, I was talking to Charlie and one of his friends about all of this, like where I should go and what I should do. And that ranch, not Spawn. The other one's not clicking to me right now. The one that's way out in the desert where he was arrested. Barker Ranch.
Right.
And then, so Charlie's like, "Oh yeah, he knows a guy with a truck, and he'll take him out to Barker." And I'm like, I haven't met Charlie yet. I don't know these people.
Yeah.
Nobody around me really knows what I'm doing. If I get hit in the head with the back of a shovel, then it started getting this is kind of getting real. And then when we started working with the publisher and getting the book ready, and the jail found out about that, and part of the selling point was I have the first photo of Charlie in the last 4 years, right? Mm-hmm. They haven't taken a prison photo in a very long time. So we're going to use that for the press release. And somehow they figured that out. They wake him up at 8 a.m, put him against the wall, take a picture, send it to TMZ. Recent photo of Charles Manson, And then you start realizing how what you do actually impacts people in there, right? And there's other inmates I was working with on all of this stuff too. And it's a whole other world,
Yeah, and it's no joke. These guys are playing for keeps, man. It's no joke when you guys start getting mixed up with these guys in those prisons, man. And they're friends on the outside. There's no joke. Yeah, you got to got to be a man of your word with these people. You mentioned earlier he had a pimp mentality, right? How do you think he picked that up? Because we know about him like at Boys Town and stuff like that. But do you think he was he had someone, a mentor who taught him that pimp mentality, or was it came by instinct?
The one thing, see, he's very observant. He spent over half of his time in isolation, right? And a lot of that was for protection because he didn't want to be around people. Like, how do I say this? The swastika on his forehead, right? We're having a meeting. It's tattooed in Indian ink. It's kind of like a really dark green. And he noticed I was kind of checking it out, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm like, well, what was that all about?" And then he tries telling me, it means 500 in Japanese, and it was the spinning wheel, and the indigenous language, that kind of stuff. But then he told me what happened when he got arrested. I can't tell you, it was bad. Imagine being a little guy like that, being thrown to the wolves, and the wolves having their way with you. It was really no matter what your feelings are towards this man, you would feel bad for what he went through. And so I think he's like, when you come into a place like this, you have to identify with your tribe, and that's what that was. You could put that on, look at me, I'm, right in front, that kind of thing. He projected that, And
he's a tiny little guy.
He's a smaller guy, but he carries himself a certain way, like he knows his limits. One of the weirdest things about him is his regard for people in military, and he's all about the uniform. He has so much respect for that kind of a thing, like police, and for if you're in a Japanese soldier, he has respect, reverence for you for doing that. I thought that was bizarre because you think he's a hippie and an anti-society, So I wouldn't call him a full-out psychopath, but there's definite tons of trauma and definite elements of manipulation, but really, from where he's coming from, it's survival,
Yeah, we're going to have you come back for a part 2. Now, his friendship or relationship with Tex Watson, he was a military type guy. He looked like a military type guy on the day of the occasion of the murders. What do you make of that?
I'm kind of on the fence. I was talking to the guy who lived with Tex for 4 years, and I'm like, is Tex for real? Did he ever go from? He's like, no, he's absolutely a Christian. He's totally never swayed from his, never swayed from his story. He is who he is, kind of thing, But Charlie told me that he's the perfect soldier. He did as he was told, And if you want to get into there's the only command I've got. We would joke about that. He would say something, and I'd say, "Oh, you're commanding me." And he once you learn the guy's humor, you can kind of use it, and he would respect that, right? Sometimes he would say complete gibberish and say, "You know what I mean?" And he's just, I said, "No, man, I couldn't follow any of that." And then he just laughed, right? Because he constantly had to test where you're at, kind of thing, right? When we did this book deal, and we're going to make some money, and he's like, "I need to ask a favor of you." And I'm like, well, what's that? He said, "There's a guy here. He needs about $500 to buy a laptop for his kid. He has no money. His girlfriend has no money, and the kid needs a computer for school. Can you take care of that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got that." That was it. That was the only thing he's ever asked me to do. That one thing.
That's interesting.
So I thought, yeah.
What, did he ever mention anything about Church of Scientology or the Process Church?
Yeah, I talked to him about that and more, all of that kind of stuff, and where he picked stuff up. All these questions kind of make a wormhole and go in a different direction.
Go ahead.
Right? But one of the people I met on this journey was a guy named Matthew Roberts. He passed away. Stan LaVey, who was Anton LaVey's grandson, was another character in the book. His stepdad is the leading authority in Manson, Nicholas Schreck.
Oh, sure.
He passed away.
No, Nicholas Schreck is alive.
No, Stanton LaVey died.
Okay, good.
But Matthew told me that for whatever reasons, the Scientologists are obsessed with him, and he, when I was meeting with, like I kept in touch with this guy like long after the book bombed, it like did what it did and all that, but he had a cell phone that he never paid for. It was completely paid for by the Church of Scientology.
Oh, Manson's contraband phone was paid by Scientology.
No, Matthew Roberts.
Oh, okay.
Guy who thought he was Charles Manson's son.
Right.
But he didn't really. You would ask him a question directly, and he wouldn't answer it, and then he'd call you about 3 days later, and he'd kind of tell you what you know. Like, he was really weird at answering stuff like that. But he didn't like.
Because you think he was going back to Scientology and getting clearance from them before talking back to you?
No. I don't think he was involved in Scientology at all. I think he kind of. He thought Hubbard was kind of like a circus performer, basically, like Anton LaVey. He didn't have any respect for him.
Okay, now I'm confused. Once again, clarify for me, who was the fellow with the
Sorry,
with the
I was
cell
going to
phone?
say, there's a character, Matthew Roberts, who believed he was Charles Manson's son, and he was funded by the Church of Scientology.
Okay, and do you think he's really? Well, there was DNA, wasn't there?
So, I really like Matthew. Like,
yeah,
he's a really good guy, and I believe he's mentally ill too. He's got a psychotic disorder. He was, some things happened that made him believe that Charles Manson was his father. I was in a visit with Charlie, and you know, if you have a sweatshirt, how the cuffs on them are kind of different material. So he cut these cuffs off of sweatshirts, and they kind of naturally rolled up, and he's wearing them like sweatbands.
Yeah.
And he just took them off, and he threw 3 of them to me, right, in the visit. So I took them, and I put them in my pocket. And so when I go meet with Matthew, I'm like, here you go, man. Here's, Charlie gave this to me, wore this for about half a year. His DNA is right there, you know. And he couldn't get it tested or, whatever. And so I sent it in, and I paid for it. And I had to send my DNA because I wore it out of, I'm stealing stuff out of an American prison. But anyways, I was stealing anything. And I had it tested, and there's no match whatsoever. There's no relation there.
I had no idea how heavily you were involved in all this stuff. You're in deep, man. You're in deep, bro. You know.
But the thing is, like I'm like, Charles, this Matthew guy thinks he's your son, and he goes, he's not. I know that, but he honestly believes he is. Yeah. He goes, okay, I get it. He goes, do you want me to talk to him? I go, I don't know. Like, what do you think? He goes, yeah, I'll talk to him. You know. But then Matthew starts doing, the tabloid circuit, and he kind of ruined that opportunity. So,
okay,
I don't know about you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do know what you're saying. Yeah. Now, what do you make of Manson? He was actually at Boys Town, and there was a lot of molestation going on there and stuff. Did he mention any of that?
Yeah, one of the stories he told me a couple times. Him and another boy were going to escape, and they actually somehow got bikes. I think Boys Town, the boys, they had bikes there, and they were able to steal a couple. And they had him hidden in a ditch. And this one boy said that, okay, it's a go. We're going to leave after supper, and my mom is going to pick us up. Or so they had an adult that was going to pick him up, and the plan was to meet where these bikes were. And Charlie went out there, and the other kid didn't show, and he didn't know what to do, and he got caught, And like stories like that, and. You heard the famous story where he was in a bar and this waitress said, "Oh, you're cute," or whatever, and what a cute boy, and what do you want for him? And his mom said, "A pitcher of beer," and they did a deal, and this waitress took him home.
No, I never heard that story.
You know it?
No.
Oh.
No.
So there's I can't remember the name of the tavern. It's in Kentucky. It's in ruins right now. It's still kind of standing. It used to be like a brothel and a boarding house and various restaurants, and it was like the history of the building is completely crazy. It's unbelievable. But Charlie lived there for a couple of years when he was a boy. His mom was an alcoholic, but remember the times she had a lot of trauma, and depending on the day, sometimes he would revere his mom and idolize her, and sometimes he would just trash talk her, right? So he was kind of like both, like literally both extremes on that. So the story goes, this waitress went up to his mom and said, "Oh, your boy's, so cute and whatever. I'd love to have a boy like that," kind of thing. He's maybe 2, 3.
Oh.
Three at the most. And they made a deal, and this waitress literally bought him for a pitcher of beer and took him home. And then a couple of days later, when they all sobered up, Charlie's uncle went and collected him from this waitress and he returned him to his mother.
And the waitress had sex with him? Molested him?
No. He just thought that was those were 2 things he thought could have changed the outcome of where things went, I look at life as we have 9 lives like a cat. We have certain events or moments where you can't go back, it's different going forward from here on in. He had those markers too, those are 2 of them, When I had I'll share this with you. I've never, so he calls me one day and he called me Fish, right? He's like, "Fish, I had a dream about you last night." I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "I had a dream, I was in the ring and I was fighting." He talked about boxing and how he's an amateur boxer and all this stuff, right? And he said, "I had this dream where I was in a ring and I was fighting for my life and you came in to help me." And he goes, "But what you didn't know was I wasn't fighting anybody. I was fighting the whole world, And so how would you interpret that?
I when I was a kid, I did some boxing myself, and I'll still have dreams about. Yeah. And you can't lift your hands up, and you can't, but those frustrating dreams, like when you're shooting a gun at somebody and the bullet's jammed up, or it just comes out like a little drip, those dreams, oh God, I don't know what they're called. Well, but back to Manson, and I got to tell you, this is some of the best. Yeah, this is some of the best Charles Manson interview I've ever done, I've ever heard, okay? So I want to thank you. And I want to have you come back, too. What did they say about the Process Church?
I didn't know about the Process Church, really, as it was referenced, and I know about the circle, the circle steps or whatever. I loosely... I've learned some. To be completely honest with you, I can't tell you very much about the Manson family and about the murders. I just got kind of thrown into this, right? And there was a time in my life where everything was kind of stupid, so I just kind of rolled with it. I just kind of,
No, cool.
Whatever.
Now, what about all these phone calls? Did you record these phone calls you had with them?
Yeah, but I just want to back one thing up here. I can't remember the name. Is it Krishna Venta or whatever is it in Utah? Where he had they blew up his church. Yeah. His cross. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Ravi Shankar or something like that?
No, Ravi Shankar was a musician.
Not Ram Dass.
There was a cult leader, and he based a lot of his belief systems on this guy. And he was devastated that they tried to kill him, and a bunch of his followers died. Huh. I think his name was Krishna Venta or something like that. Okay. So there were cult references, but he said he didn't know, had never heard the word cult in his travels until he started going to court. And then he'd throw out these stories. He'd say my lawyer was living in a car in the parking lot, and then you find out this is true, or he'd be telling us stories about the family, Angela Lansbury.
Yes.
The actress. So her daughter, she signed over her daughter to Charles Manson. And you're like, yeah, okay, Charlie. So I just love pop culture. So I would get these stories from him, and he's like, yeah, man. And so one night they went and they did this thing where they called creepy crawl, and they were doing some weird training, and they always had stuff to do. They're always plotting. And keep in mind, Charlie is schizophrenic, right? He's very paranoid. And so they go and they rob Angela's house, and they take a bunch of her fur coats. I guess that was a fashionable thing in the 60s or whatever. And so he had a dune buggy, and he glued these coats of Angela's and whoever else's that they stole. So it looked like a wild beast, and he had these horns on this dune buggy thing. And he just he just loved recounting that kind of stuff, But that
interesting. He had that dune buggy, and Colonel Michael Aquino had a similar dune buggy. Anything ever that come up?
When I talked to him and Anton LaVey never met each other.
Yeah.
He just said he was the same thing. He just thought he was like a performer, a sideshow entertainer. He didn't really. I didn't talk to him about Aquino.
Now, what
He didn't
about
like
up at
talking.
Barker Ranch? They had armed military field radios. Did anything come up about that?
No, I didn't ask him. I'm just gonna get a sip of tea here.
Good.
Initially, we didn't have ground rules, but he said there's so much on the murders. I don't want you to, I'm not going to talk about that. But then he'd always bring that up anyways, right? The one thing that really kept growing and still developing, and even with the way we see with celebrity now. So when they were at Spawn Ranch, he had his own area, right?
Yeah.
And he was kind of a gypsy, and he's nomadic, and it wasn't like he was there and they had meetings. He would leave for like weeks at a time sometimes, right? Because he's always scamming and he's all over the place, right? But they respected him because he was older than them. He was like the oldest kid, right? He was in his probably 30s, and these people are all in their 20s. And plus he knew he had all the jail mentality behind him, right? And so they would steal things like paintings and these works of art and give them to him. So he had a room on Spawn that was filled with all of this stuff. I'd never heard this story before. He's telling me this, and I'm like, and then he said, like, and where do you think all of that stuff went after the raid or whatever, Like, and back then, I think
cops took it.
When I start, when you start working with other collectors and people who are obsessed with things, and the whole thing looks like what I think it is, like my personal theory. I mean, now you got him at Barker Ranch. He's trying to dig this hole into the earth, and he's stolen some, like underwater equipment to go scuba diving gear and stuff, because he thought there was this underground world he was going to, discover and go into. And then you hear about the Beach Boys, and he's listening to music backwards and picking up these phrases and all this kind of stuff. And if you look at it, it's a psychotic break, right? It's no big mystery. Like I see this every day in my work, every other day. That's what the guy had. He had a nervous breakdown. He actually felt responsible to these kids and to try and make life okay for them, as dysfunctional as they all are. I think he just, it was meant. A lot of this is mental illness,
Yeah.
And then you throw in all the drugs that Tex is doing and everybody else, But he tells me for the most part he stayed away from that. He wasn't really into drugs, but even in jail, he would call and he'd be totally stoned or he'd be totally drunk, and I have those calls recorded. Yeah.
Now, what about the whole May Brussels theory that there was some kind of a CIA psyop, the whole operation? Did you ever address that with him?
I got fascinated with Laurel Canyon and that whole history, and how are all these people living in $1 million homes with no income? There was no venue to play, there was no radio, there was no record companies, and they're creating this monumental music, And so Charlie told me that, in the day when you went to the whiskey and stuff, it was all about the dancers. They called themselves, come see the crazy dancers, And he'd actually get up and he'd show you how he used to dance and stuff. And then you think, okay, whatever. And then I'm watching a documentary, and that was real. The bands were kind of the closer everyone went out to see these people dance. That was the draw.
Yeah, whiskey was a go-go place.
So he would talk about being at the whiskey, and he would talk about. But then it depends. I'd ask him about Hank Williams. On a good day, so Hank was, the guy who was honest as you could be as a musician, and then he said he was a wimp,
But what do you make of the May Brussels theory that this was a government psyop, the whole Manson operation and the murders?
I think, and there's evidence. See, what went down in the Tate house? They all knew each other, right? The celebrity was convoluting with the hippies. They were all filming each other. Polanski was a noted director at that time, and he had equipment and access to things, and he had one of the first VCRs. And so I was told that they got Sammy Davis Jr. and Jane Fonda and whoever allegedly, whatever you guys say, don't want to be sued, but throw a name Yul Brenner or whatever, name any celebrity, they would film this stuff and watch it at these parties and just have a blast, thinking it was hilarious, right? And considering how, like, in a lot of this stuff is extremely, like, criminal, what they were filming.
Right.
You know, I'm not going to...
No, I've heard those stories,
you know,
yeah.
and so I think when they went out and...
Wait a second. You had Manson on recording admitting to all that? Not talking to about... I asked him about this stuff. He wouldn't say anything about that. About the filming.
But then I heard about him and, like, ask him about Sonny Ono, right? And
yeah.
He told me the story where Sonny had a hot date and he lent Sonny a suit and that date was with Cher, you know? And that's a true story. It checks out, you know.
What about the mamas and the papas? Papa Phillips. Anything come up with that name?
Well, I was just talking to O'Neill a couple of weeks ago, and he's trying to figure out...
Tom O'Neill.
Mama Cass. Yeah, sorry. Tom, yeah. He's trying to figure out if Mama Cass was ever really involved with Charlie. Charlie told me that she wanted to testify at the trial, and she wasn't allowed. I've never... officially read that, but back to the Polanski Tate thing.
Yeah.
He said that was his pool. They know each other. They rode horses at Spawn Ranch, right? He knew Sharon. They all knew each other.
No, I believe that. Yeah, and drug dealing too. There was drug supplying going on back and forth, correct?
Sure.
Yeah. Now, what about the name Sirhan Sirhan? Have you ever seen that customs report? Men saying that Sirhan Sirhan attended parties at Polanski's house? No,
but I saw him in a visit once. He's with two other people, kind of in the corner. I didn't know who he was, and then I heard after, that was, you know. See where Charlie was. He was in a place called PHU. I'll back this up. I can't remember. I think he was I can't remember which prison he was in, and there was a Hare Krishna guy who was chanting insistently, and Charlie got in a fight with this guy, and this guy had some paint thinner from shop or whatever. He poured it on Charlie and almost lit him on fire, and it was a very bad burn. So they put him in isolation because they didn't know what to do with this guy, and then they made this unit for all of these high-profile inmates, right? So they're all major informants or people who have books about them and Netflix specials, you know? And Sirhan was there. The one story I remember, I haven't really revisited this. I haven't went back in my book. I haven't, you know, but I remember when they stripped his room, he had 90 cans of tuna or something, right? And I was like, what? I didn't understand why the guy likes fish so much, but they're like, no. Each can of tuna is $1. It's currency, right? So yeah, the trade and barter stamps are a big deal, you know.
Right. I had heard that he used to communicate with Sirhan Sirhan in prison through kites. Is that true?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Wow.
Charlie liked him. Yeah.
Did the name Robert Evans ever come up? Jack Nicholson.
That doesn't. No. If I would ask him specifically about an actor or something, he would say, you know, I asked him about Elvis. He told me about playing cards in one of Elvis's properties. He never met him before. A lot of the musician stuff, like the Beach Boys. He told me how all that all happened, and they did record a couple of his songs, right? "Cease to Exist" or something, and another one.
And was he able to gain access to these people because of his ability to provide them with prostitutes?
Well, having said that, he was a prostitute himself. I'll just throw this at you. So when I'm doing this book, right, he couldn't provide me with this 4 hour. He was going to give me 3 or 4 hours to tell his life. That was going to be his part of the book. And then things happened where he couldn't do that. And so he's like, "Fish, you're on your own, man. I can't help you." And so I'm saying, okay, can I just use these phone calls as your dialogue? He's like, "Yeah, do whatever you need to do," kind of thing. And so when I was going through editing and all these, I have a couple hundred phone calls or whatever. I got these 300 or 400 phone calls, and what was the question again? Because I was going somewhere with this. I'm sorry.
That he was able to get access to people like the Beach Boys through prostitution.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. And so I would go through, transcribe all of this stuff. I would send it to one of his friends. They would correct it because I would sometimes get the words wrong. And there's conversations. One time he's mad at me and he's saying "Are you going to drag me down the highway in my with chains, and my entrails are going to come out on the highway,
Wow.
and all his guts and gore. And then he's, like sometimes he's like graphic like that. And he was telling me the story where he's in Hollywood, and when he needed money, he'd go to wherever the prostitutes were, and he goes, I'd get oral sex and $20. That's a good deal, man. So he was doing the same thing,
But he tried to claim that he was receiving instead of performing.
Yeah, that's what he told me.
And what do you think, though?
Well, I think he did. I don't think he was. I don't think he really cared. It's a hustle, and $20.
But back to the whole thing about the Mae Brussel theory that this was a CIA or PSYOP operation. Did you ever discuss that with him? And he was being manipulated?
Yeah, I did. I asked him about the, because in history it looks like those events kind of collapsed the hippie movement. It looked like colleges were kind of getting organized. People were protesting. People were getting vocal. They really were making, the Vietnam was a huge issue. And then they're like, these are hippies. Look what they do. They'll kill your family kind of thing.
Right.
And Charlie would tell me that they wouldn't let him bathe or they wouldn't let him cut his hair. And then they drag him up for court appearances like that. And that's true. They tried to put that image on him,
Did he ever mention anything about Jeff McDonald, Dr. Jeff McDonald, and the Fort Bragg murders?
No, I never.
Real quick, I'd like to insert, just for the audience, I'd like to interrupt my interview with Marlin Marynick. Jim Morrison, it's widely discussed about how Jim Morrison's father was the admiral that caused the Gulf of Tonkin incident. I have from Jim Morrison's brother-in-law, Alan Graham, Captain Pink, who worked for Larry Flint, that Jim Morrison was very close to his admiral father right up until the end, and his father was very suspicious about his death. So that whole theory about Morrison and the admiral, they weren't estranged. Yeah. They were very close right up until Morrison's death.
Out of all of those people, Neil Young, he had respect for, and Morrison, that's about it. Like Neil Young bought him a motorcycle.
Now that's fascinating. I just heard recently someone saying that they thought that Neil Young was some type of agent that had some kind of background with that kind of Laurel Canyon manipulation. You know anything about that?
He's from where I am, right?
Yeah.
He's from Winnipeg, which is like 6 hours away from where I live. Neil Young is. I
never heard anything about him, but I just heard this recently.
There's stuff, like, you're only allowed to have, like, so many books in your cell and so many photos. That he had, endless amounts of stuff.
Yeah.
He called me one day and said, I'm going away for a while, and I'm like, okay. And the next day I hear that he's in the hole. Like, I don't know how he didn't know in advance. Like, stuff, like, there's stuff, and he's comfortable in that environment, And he said, he prophesized. He said, like, 20 years from now, you guys will be banging to get into prisons. Watch the way the world's going,
Whoa.
Like, he called, I asked him one day how I was doing. He goes, oh, man, I'm tired, man. Well, what's going on? He goes, I can't do this anymore. I go, do what? He was holding up the economy. And so he's in a hole, and when you understand how he talks, he wanted, we would talk about space and quantum physics and meditation and spiritual, like a lot of that kind of stuff, right? And he wanted I'd sent him some pictures that the Hubble telescope took, like it was from a calendar or something, and I cut them out and sent them to him, and he wanted a big one to put on the ceiling in the hole. And so I knew what he was talking about. And so I found a poster, cut it into 8x10 pieces, and it got through. He stuck it to the ceiling. I have no idea how he stuck it to the ceiling. And he wrote me a letter about his observations in space, right? Which I don't understand at all, to be honest with you. It's just, but that's kind of like a different side of the guy,
Well, how does he feel? So many people worship him like a deity. Or does he see of himself as a deity? Or does he think they're suckers?
No, he hated his fans.
Really?
He's like, who the hell would want to be me? Like, what is wrong with people, And you have limited movement and freedom in a prison. He's like, what do they think,
Mm-hmm.
And I collect autographs and stuff. And so he's like, he would tell me, like, when people, they would send him questionnaires or whatever, or they'd send him a check, and make sure you sign the back of the check chart, that kind of stuff to try to get an autograph. And so that's part of his screening. Like, I just put my home address, like, this is where I live. If you sent him a card with like a box number, he wouldn't write you back, because he think you're hiding something on him. He wanted transparency all the time.
Did he share your information with other inmates who then started writing to you and calling you?
No, but they would steal it out of his garbage can or borrow his book, or
because they sell that. He probably sold it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about? We're running out of time. Quick question: were you involved with the whole controversy after his death about photographs at the funeral and ashes and all that stuff? That was a pretty wacky time, right?
Yeah, I got a letter from him, and I knew he was like, I knew where his health was at, and it was basically a goodbye thing, and he had left a couple messages. I never got to connect with him, but once he went into hospital like that, they kind of protected his, he wasn't getting his mail. No one was hearing from him. That whole thing it's like any subculture. We all know each other. Like I could tell you that the 5 top Manson people, who they are and what our relationships all are with each other. But it's the whole thing with his grandson, that shouldn't have played out like that, But he told me that was what was going to happen. They were going to make a spectacle out of him when he died, And he comes from a time when that actually did happen, where they would, like, the Bonnie and Clyde car and all that stuff was normal, like sideshow attractions, So he did talk like that, but there were definitely no plans to do that. And I do think the immediate people around him, for the most part, well, you got to ask yourself, like, would anybody still be talking to this guy who wasn't famous that we're around, Yeah. So I think the celebrity has a lot to do with it, and it makes you cool because by association, right? And I know that no one cares about when you do a book with someone, like, I know that, and I don't want to say it was a scam, but the guy said, he's letting me do this book. Of course, I'm going to give him half. Like, I don't see any. Yeah, that's probably a problem. I've never said that on an interview before. but that was, if you're going to go into an arrangement, like, he's not stupid, right? He knows what his autograph is worth. And so at one point, he's like, I wish I could help you out, man. Like, I got married. I have 3 kids that were from my wife's prior relationship. And I sent him a picture of everybody. Oh, that's why you're so distant. Good-looking family. And then he calls me one day and he goes, I'd like to help you guys out. You're starting a family. Like, do you need anything? I'm like, no, I don't need nothing. He's like, I got $18,000 I can give you. I'm like, no, man, I'm good. Like, I don't want to borrow. Like, like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
He'd say stuff like, I can have someone knock on your door in 3 days. Like, is that a threat, or is that, A
little of both, yeah.
Kind of like.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're running out of time. I noticed on your Facebook friend list you got Fantastic Fig, Paul Fagan.
Yes.
He used to throw those parties. Close hand, sleight of hand magician used to throw those parties up above the Sunset Strip. What's your association with him?
Do you know who Mark Hatton was? He was one of Anna Nicole's partners.
Oh no, I don't. But I got some stories about her.
He was tragically. It's when you get involved with people, billions of dollars, bad things can happen to you. You know, and Mark was an incredible guy, and Fig was Mark's lawyer. And when I was doing all of this Manson stuff, he's like, I was in LA, and he goes, "You got to meet Fig." And so I just called him, and we hit it off. And he's like, "Why don't you come hang out? Let's go for dinner." So I went to his place, and he's one of the leading, like, top 10 close-up magicians in the world, right? Yeah. Like, unbelievable. I'm a big magic fan. And so he showed me a bunch of his magic, and he told me a story, and it's like, you know, he had been to parties and, you know, stories about Charlie, but they never met. It, you know, wasn't, we just kind of hung out, and, like, he used to date Pam Grier, he told me, and I could tell you some off the.
We'll have to, because the stories of those parties are legendary, if true.
Yeah,
but how much can you exaggerate at this point?
He had law practices. He had 400 employees. You know, he incredible, gracious guy. You know, I just kind of hung out with him and emailed him a little bit. I know now he's in hard times. He's in like a
hospice, like a nursing home where they're abusing. Yeah.
I think he's dementing. He's not in a good place.
Yeah, well, that's what happens at the end of your life. All your friends forget you. We have been talking to Marlin Marynick, and the book he's written is called Charles Manson Now. Okay, and he's written another book called Undisclosed Secrets of the AIDS Epidemic. Now, Marlon, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'd love to have you back. In fact, I'd like to hold this conversation in abeyance until I have you come back and we do a second part two. Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, man. Thank you so much. Marlon, anything like 1 minute? What do you want to leave us with?
Okay, my book is out of print. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but there's a Facebook. The book is called Charles Manson Now.
Right.
You can download it for free, or if you just push Charles Manson Now PDF, I've signed it over to a couple places that have it for free, so you can just go grab a copy if you want.
Why don't you rewrite it a little bit and put it back up on Amazon?
I thought about doing that, but
or
we
Patreon.
didn't get into the whole Charles curse kind of thing.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha.
But I don't know. Like I think people think I'm too sympathetic towards the guy, and in a way, I kind of probably did treat him like a client a little bit. I overlooked things because of his illness. We could talk a little bit more about that next time. But yeah.
No, I'm the same way, man. I deal with a lot of people. A lot of people, have done horrible things, and I can kind of overlook it too, and just deal with them as a professional and just accept them the way they are, and try and I don't know. You take them.
When I met him. Oh, sorry. I was going to say he's in his late 70s, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, you take people as they come. You can't judge everybody before you meet them. Marlin Marynick, man, comes with the gold. One of the best Charles Manson interviews I think we've had so far. Thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, you're very welcome. This was an honor.
No, thank you. So, no, it was an honor for me. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.